For nearly a century, the Foro Italico has stood as a silent witness to the evolution of power. Its grounds are a cathedral of marble and red clay, where the statues of Stadio dei Marmi look down with hollow eyes, frozen in a time when the world was much smaller than it is today. These stone giants were carved to celebrate a very specific kind of excellence: European, Mediterranean, Western. Since 1930, they have watched the greatest names in the history of tennis slide across the dirt. But for those 96 years, their gaze never once fell upon a player carrying the blue, red, and gold of the Philippines. Not once in the entire Open era had a Filipino name been etched into the main draw of the Italian Open. Until now, what happened on May 6, 2026, wasn't just a win in a tennis match. It was a structural collapse of a barrier that had been reinforced by 100 years of institutional neglect and geographic exclusion. When Alex Eala stepped onto that court, she wasn't just playing for a ranking or a paycheck. She was walking into a space that history had essentially told her she didn't belong in. But history has a funny way of being rewritten when the right person finds the right moment. And as we sit here today, looking at the wreckage of the draw in Rome, we have to ask ourselves, are we watching the rise of a new star, or are we witnessing the beginning of a total shift in the global tennis power structure? The implication here goes far beyond the baseline. This is about the democratization of a sport that has long been a gated community. If you think this is just another underdog story, you're missing the bigger picture. We are looking at a movement fueled by a global diaspora, a family legacy hidden in the shadows of the Vatican, and a psychological resilience that seems to thrive the moment the walls start closing in. This week, Eala did something no Filipino man or woman had ever done, and she did it while walking in the literal footsteps of a great-grandmother who once worked in the very city she is now conquering. There is a mystery in that connection, a sentimental circle that suggests this run in Rome was destined long before Eala ever picked up a racket. But destiny is a heavy word, and in professional tennis, it's usually crushed by the weight of statistics. Standing in front of Eala now is Elena Rybakina, the world number 2, a woman who wins 92% of her matches when she takes the first set. On paper, the dream ends here. The data says the door is about to be slammed shut. But if you look closer at the records, if you find the one specific crack in Rybakina's armor that only exists here, in this city, in this specific round, you start to realize that the nightmare draw Eala was supposed to suffer through might actually be turning into a nightmare for the establishment. To understand how we got to this precipice, we have to look back at the silence that preceded it. For decades, Southeast Asia was a waiting room of the tennis world. The sport expanded into Eastern Europe, then China, then South America. But the Philippines remained a footnote, a country with immense passion but no seat at the high table. The Italian Open, one of the most prestigious 1,000-level events on the calendar, was the ultimate symbol of this exclusion. It is a tournament of tradition, of old-world elegance. And for a century, that tradition did not include Manila. When Alex Eala arrived in Rome just a few days ago, her record in this city was a clean, cold 0. No wins, no appearances, no history. She was ranked 44th in the world, low enough to be considered a passenger in a bracket filled with giants. The headlines on Sunday morning were brutal. They called it a nightmare draw. They looked at the names surrounding her and essentially began writing her exit interview before she had even laced up her shoes. But Eala doesn't play the game on paper. She has spoken often about her ability to compartmentalize, to take the chaotic pressure of representing an entire nation and lock it away in a small room in her mind, leaving only the player on the court. On Wednesday, May 6, that player met Magdalena Frech. Frech was a favorite, higher ranked, more experienced on the grueling red clay of Europe, and seeded to move forward. What happened next was the first tremor in what would become an earthquake. Eala didn't just beat Frech. She erased her. A 6-0 opening set is a psychological execution. It's a statement that says, I am not here to participate. I am here to take over. When Frech stabilized and took the second set 6-3, the narrative tried to reset. This is the moment where the experience factor usually kicks in, where the young player from a non-traditional tennis nation realizes where they are and starts to fade. But Eala went back into that room in her mind. She closed the third set 6-4, and in that moment, 96 years of waiting came to an end. The first Filipino win in the history of the Italian Open was no longer a goal. It was a fact. But that was just the prologue. The real test of a breakthrough isn't the first win. It's what you do when the world starts watching. 2 days later, on Friday, May 8th, Eala walked onto Court Pietrangeli. If you've never seen Pietrangeli, it is perhaps the most beautiful and intimidating court in the world. It is a sunken bowl surrounded by those massive marble statues. It feels less like a tennis match and more like a gladiatorial arena. Across the net stood Wang Xinyu, the number 31 seed. This match carried a hidden weight. Just 4 months ago in Auckland, Wang had beaten Eala in a semifinal. It was a loss that had lingered, a reminder that Eala could get close to the top, but couldn't quite break the ceiling. When the match began, it looked like history was going to repeat itself. Eala fell behind 0-3 almost immediately. The statues were watching. The crowd was hushed, and the Auckland ghosts were screaming. This is the why factor that defines the elite. Why did she not crumble? Why? In a city where her country had no history, did she feel like she couldn't lose? The answer might lie in a walk she took between those two matches. Eala decided to tour Rome, to find a moment of peace away from the red clay. She found herself walking near the Vatican, past the grand buildings and the echoes of empires. She stopped in front of a building she didn't recognize at first, only to realize it was the embassy of the Philippines to the Holy See. And then, the realization hit her like a lightning bolt. Her great-grandmother had worked in that very building. Decades ago, a woman from her family had walked these same streets, serving her country in a diplomatic capacity, never imagining that her great-granddaughter would return to the city as a different kind of ambassador, one carrying a racket instead of suitcase. Eala told the Associated Press that the moment felt full circle. It was sentimental, but it was also grounding. It reminded her that the Philippines isn't new to the world stage. They have always been there, often in the background, often behind the scenes. When she went back to Court Pietrangeli to face Wang, she wasn't 0-3 down in a vacuum. She was standing on a foundation that her family had started building 3 generations ago. She won 6 of the next 7 games. She turned a 0-3 deficit into a 6-4, 6-3 victory. She leveled the head-to-head. She moved to a career-high ranking of 42. And she did it in front of a crowd that didn't sound like a typical Rome audience. If you closed your eyes during that match, you would have thought you were in Manila. Fans had flown in from London, from Germany, from Malta. They didn't come because they liked the tournament. They came because they were part of a movement. The chant Laban Alex, fight Alex, echoed off the marble faces of statues. Even the local Italians, caught up in the sheer magnetism of the moment, began shouting Forza Alex. This is the Alex Eala effect. It is a moment a sport stops being a game and starts being identity. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. As an investigative look at this story, we have to ask, is this sustainable? Tennis history is littered with players who had one magical week and then vanished into the middle of the pack. The WTA is a brutal machine that grinds down sentimental stories. The reality is that Eala is now facing Elena Rybakina. Rybakina is a former Wimbledon champion and a former Rome champion. She is a powerhouse who plays a brand of heavy tennis that usually overwhelms smaller, more tactical players like Eala. If we look at the cold, hard data, Rybakina is 24-2 in matches where she wins the first set this year. She has won 12 consecutive opening matches at this level. She is the gatekeeper of the elite. To the critics, Eala's run is a feel-good story that ends today. They will say the embassy connection is a nice coincidence, but it doesn't help you return a 120-mile-per-hour serve. They will say the fans are loud, but they can't hit a cross-court forehand. However, there's a countermetric that the analysts are ignoring. Every champion has a blind spot, and Rybakina's blind spot is the 3rd round in Rome. Statistically, she is 1-3 in this specific round throughout her career. There is something about the timing of the tournament, the way the clay settles by the 3rd round, or perhaps just a psychological hurdle. But Rybakina is more vulnerable today than she will be in the quarterfinals or the final. Eala isn't just playing the world number 2. She's playing the version of the world number 2 that has historically struggled exactly where they are standing right now. Furthermore, we have to look at the structural reality I mentioned earlier. The WTA understands that Alex Eala is the key to an entire region. The Manila WTA 125 tournament that launched in January was a direct response to her rise. The tour sees the fans flying in from across Europe. They see the engagement numbers. This isn't just about one player. It's about the commercial expansion of the sport into Southeast Asia. When Billie Jean King talks about the sport needing to reflect the geographic breadth of the world, she is talking about Alex Eala. Even if no official statement has been released by King this week, Eala is a living embodiment of King's 50-year mission. She is the proof that when you open the gates, the world walks in. As we look toward the immediate future, the stakes are staggering. If Eala wins today, she becomes the first Filipino ever to reach the round of 16 in Rome. She would be only the second woman from an Asian country to beat a top 5 opponent at this event, the first being Rybakina herself when she represented Kazakhstan. The irony of that is not lost on those who follow the sport's shifting borders. But beyond Rome, there's the shadow of Roland Garros. In 2 weeks, the French Open begins. Eala has never been past the second round of a Grand Slam. She told the AP, with a level of humility that borders on a warning, "I haven't been past the second round, so that would be nice." That is the understatement of the century. If she carries this Rome form into Paris, she isn't just looking for a third-round appearance. She's looking to blow the draw wide open. This is the narrative flow of a career reaching its inflection point. You have the backstory, the years of training at the Nadal Academy, the junior Grand Slam titles, the slow grind to the lower tiers of professional circuit. You have the why, the family legacy, the great-grandmother in the embassy, the weight of a nation that has waited a century for this moment. And you have the now, the marble statues, the red clay, and the world number 2 standing in the way. What happens 5 years from now? If Eala continues this trajectory, the 2026 Italian Open will be remembered as the big bang of Philippine tennis. We will look back at this script as the moment the conversation changed from "Can a Filipino compete?" to "How many Filipinos will be in the top 100?" We will see a WTA tour that treats Manila with the same reverence it treats Rome or Paris. We will see a generation of kids in Quezon City and Cebu who no longer look at the marble statues of the Foro Italico as symbols of a distant, unreachable world, but as witnesses to a history they are a part of. The long-term trajectory of this story isn't just about trophies. It's about the erasure of the word impossible from the Filipino sporting lexicon. We've seen it in boxing, we've seen it in weightlifting, and now we're seeing it in the most traditional, most gate-kept sport of them all. Alex Eala is not just winning matches. She is conducting a masterclass in psychological warfare against the status quo. She is showing every underdog that the nightmare draw is only a nightmare if you accept the role of the victim. If you accept the role of the protagonist, the nightmare belongs to the opponent. As this documentary comes to a close, I want you to think about those statues one more time. For nearly 100 years, they didn't change. They stayed silent, frozen in their celebration of a limited world. But this week, if you look closely at the red clay of Court Pietrangeli, you'll see that the ground has shifted. The silence has been replaced by Laban Alex. The exclusion has been replaced by a career-high ranking. And the history of the Italian Open has finally, after a century of waiting, become a global story. Whether she wins or loses against Rybakina today, the door is already off its hinges. You cannot unsee what has happened in Rome. You cannot unhear the chants. You cannot erase the fact that a girl from the Philippines found her great-grandmother's spirit in a Vatican embassy and used it to conquer the most beautiful court in Europe. The question isn't whether Alex Eala belongs here. The question is how the rest of the tennis world is going to keep up with her. The next chapter is only 2 weeks away in Paris. And if what we've seen in Rome is any indication, the world is not prepared for what's coming next. Does Alex Eala beat Elena Rybakina today and become the first Filipino in history to reach the round of 16 in Rome? Or does the world number 2 prove that the old guard still holds the keys to the kingdom? Drop your prediction in the comments right now. I want to see where you stand on this. Are you betting on the data, or are you betting on the destiny? Every time a player steps onto a court to rewrite the history of their nation, this channel is going to be here to document every frame, every statistic, and every hidden connection. If you want to be part of this deep dive as we move toward Roland Garros on May 24th, you know what to do. Subscribe, turn on notifications and stay with us. Because based on what just happened in Rome, the most incredible part of this story is only just beginning. The wall didn't just crack. It fell. And Alex Eala is the one standing on top of the rubble.